So it seems that the Adeptus Mechanicus are getting some rather awesome new rules for 40k 10th edition. We've got a massive radiation bombardment that's handing out a bunch of mortal wounds or battle shock to the enemy army-wide turn 1, a slimmed down but quite interesting choice of Doctrina Imperatives each turn, a couple of powerful stratagems, and potentially a few nerfs to certain units in the faction as everything seems to hit on 4+ base. Let's talk through all the reveals and what they mean for the servants of the Machine God. Hello and welcome back to Warspecs Tactics, where today we're talking Adeptus Mechanicus, and Games Workshop has been keeping these faction previews coming for the new edition of Warhammer 40k. There's some really interesting rules here, including perhaps one of the most unusual detachment-specific rules that we've seen so far. I wasn't exactly guessing that the core Admech detachment would have a massive radiation bombardment before turn 1. Going through the reveals, we've got a fairly standard collection of Games Workshop previews here. Perhaps for core changes to the faction, I strongly suspect that compared with the 9th edition codex, the Adeptus Mechanicus will have lost a fair bit of complexity. Maybe not the worst thing in the world though. Their codex maybe took the stacking synergies that 9th edition brought to the biggest extreme that any army had, combining things like holy orders, stratagems, multiple relic and warlord trait buffs to make some very stacked units, and they did have quite a lot of moving parts that were somewhat difficult for players and the enemy players to understand what was going on. I feel like it was almost inevitable that they were going to get reined in a bit in 10th edition, which does seem to make ease of play a real core tenet of the game. It seems that the ballistic skill of the units is now going down to ballistic skill 4+ across the army. This does seem to be a bit of a trend in 10th edition now. We've already seen the Leagues of Votan drop down to a 4+. I wonder if that might be a trend for any other armies too. It seems that if you really want it, you can very easily get the heavy keyword on just about every weapon in the game though. That's via the Doctrina Imperatives, so you can still have your army hitting on a 3+, but it's now going to come at the expense of movement. Ballistic skill 4+ won't be great when you're firing against modifiers and things. -1 on a BS 4+ is so much worse than on a 3+. Unlike the World Eaters, who for some reason only had half of their special rules shown off, the Admech fortunately get to see both their main faction rule and their detachment special rule. The faction is Doctrina Imperatives, and that's been redesigned to a whole army rule so it doesn't just affect Skitarii units now, and you pick between one of 2 decent buffs each turn. Canticles of the omnissiah as we know it seems like it's gone away, but it looks like it's been redesigned as core special rule, which is a selection of 3 different auras. The launch detachment for supposedly balanced Admech is going to be the Rad Cohort. Like I said, it's kind of unusual. The detachment special rule is actually a bombardment mechanism to hit the enemy in their own deployment zone, potentially giving them a fairly rough standing start to the game. I guess the Adeptus Mechanicus codex is out really quite soon, so we're not going to have all that long to wait for the rest of their options. I believe that was going to be coming in winter. Then beyond that, we've got a fair few more rules. The Ruststalker rules for their movement buff, which seem rather nice, 2 stratagems that are linked to their doctrinas, an Onager Eradication Beamer, and then a couple of datasheets, the Vanguard and Cawl, both of which have interesting bits. Let's start out with the big stuff first then, and first up we have the Doctrina Imperatives. So this will be the Admech rule that's common to all detachments, not just locked to one of them. Previously the system was that it only affected the Skitarii units in the army, so not the Tech Priests and the Castellan robots and things who are under Cult Mechanicus, but now it looks like this rule will affect the entire army, and it's just picking one of 2 different buffs each turn. Despite that, I do think that the choice really is quite meaningful. Either choose between a +1 to hit and a little bit of extra defense in your deployment zone, or a movement buff and a small damage boost against enemies in their deployment zone. The first one is called the Protector Imperative. The first part of this one is the ballistic skill buff. Basically, every single ranged weapon in your army gains the heavy keyword, and in the new edition that's the one where if you stay stationary, then you get to hit on +1 ballistic skill. As I mentioned, Admech look like they've dropped down from ballistic skill 3+ to ballistic skill 4+, so this would put them back up to 3s. Effectively choosing this and using this benefit would be a 33% increase to damage, which I think is very meaningful if your unit can afford not to move. Realistically, I'm not sure that this one's always going to be the best option. Movement is just very important in 40k. You need to get to objectives, get lines of sight, potentially stay safe from the enemies, or move up to engage them. But if you do have any units that are optimally positioned already, then it's pretty nice. Perhaps a rule that's going to be a bit better on tables that don't have that much cover on, that are easy to get lines of sight. The second boost is an debuff to enemy ranged weapons. They get worse by AP -1 if they target units that are entirely within your deployment zone. So I guess between the 2 different buffs, this is maybe the detachment rule that really doubles down on making Admech into a gunline army. If you do have a high amount of units that just want to sit in their own deployment zone and shoot the enemy hard, then this rule would make them more dangerous and also a bit tougher as well. Worsening AP does sound good, but it looks like base Skitarii at least might have had their saves worsened a touch. They're now only save 5+, not 4+. The second boost is the Conqueror Imperative. This one's the movement buff and the damage buff. The movement buff basically being a weapon keyword handed out again, but instead of the heavy weapon keyword, it's the assault weapon keyword. I believe from other previews, Games Workshop has previously said that the assault keyword will no longer give you a -1 to hit if you advance, so this means essentially, unless you are planning on charging with your unit, every single unit in your army just gain d6-inch movement and can still fire to full effect. That's very, very meaningful in my opinion, and again pretty powerful at the start of the game. That'll be great for getting lines of sight or getting to the midfield objectives early. And it does seem a massive boost to the army if your units aren't just in ideal positions where they can afford to sit and shoot. Extra movement in 40k is massive. The other one is the damage buff, and I think this is pretty useful as well. Extra AP against enemy units within their own deployment zone. Again, if you've got a lot of line of sight early in the game, this one could be pretty nice for gunning down enemies that are just on their first turn. Unless the enemy units are all hiding behind terrain or something, this could give you quite a big boost on the first turn of the game. Unless the enemy gets first turn, I suppose, and they get to move out their deployment zone early. Otherwise, a bit later on, it might have a little bit less effect. I feel like between this and the Rad bombardment rule, enemies are going to want to scoot out of their deployment zone soon. Overall, I think that both of these are really quite usable depending on the game state. Games Workshop's done well to make both of them good, I think. Despite the very nice boost of the extra ballistic skill, I kind of feel like Conqueror might get played more on fairly terrain-dense tables. I feel like it's just a bit rarer than you might expect, than units can literally afford to sit completely still and just shoot. Both of them seem to have advantages to play them early in the game, but I'd say maybe the Conqueror one might be the one to go for early, as getting the movement and the extra AP while the opponent is still clustered up in their deployment zone seems like it's nice. Perhaps the Protector one could be fairly nice to trigger sometime in the mid-game, when your units are already kind of in the right sort of positions and the enemy's starting to expose themselves and get gunned down. The fact that you can choose them at the start of the battle round is interesting enough. It means that you can see the enemy's deployment before you're selecting them, but it could be kind of annoying if your opponent has the first turn. It might mean that you're choosing these before the enemy gets to move, so you don't know how much of their army is going to be on show if you don't move. Finally, it's interesting that both of these are pretty much entirely focused on the ranged game. Really doubles down on making shooting the faction theme of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and I feel like that's not going to change anytime soon. Overall though, I like these rules. I feel like Games Workshop has done quite well with them. Genuinely a meaningful choice for the army each turn. There might be some units that might prefer one Doctrina over the other, so you're going to have to make some tactical decisions there. Next up, we've got the big scary radiation bombardment, and it seems that the Admech launch detachment is called the Rad Cohort. Kind of interesting for it to be kind of the primary detachment, this. It kind of reminds me of preliminary bombardment type rules from editions past in 40k. Basically the way that this works is that the Admech artillery and then the Rad fallout gets to hammer the opponent in their own deployment zone all game long. It's really going to incentivize for enemies to move out of their deployment and move up aggressively towards your forces. The biggest benefit of this thing is definitely on battle round 1. Basically each enemy unit in the opposing army has a choice to make. Either they can choose to stand firm and take some damage, or they can choose to take cover and take automatic battle shock in the first battle round. If they decide to stand firm and risk the damage, then you roll a dice, and on a 3+ the enemy takes d3 mortal wounds. That's really quite nice, to be honest. If they choose to do that with a whole bunch of units, you're going to do some pretty decent chip damage across the entire enemy army, and certain units just really aren't going to be able to afford to risk that, particularly 1-wound infantry units that are really quite valuable. You really don't want this one to be going off on things like Eldar Aspect Warriors. I guess the rule does give the opponent the power to select the best choice for each of their units, so if there's something that they absolutely can't have battle shocks, then they can just take a bit of damage, and if there's something that they just really can't afford that damage on, then they can accept the battle shock. So the choice is never going to be the one that you want for the enemy unit, I guess, which would limit its impact just a little bit. Still though, with a lot of units that just can't really afford to take that damage, then causing mass battle shock round 1 could be really nice. Certain units wouldn't be able to contest midfield objectives. A lot of things might not be able to use stratagems turn 1, and if you did lock anything in combat with early charges, it might give them problems retreating. Then on battle rounds 2+, after the bombardment comes some radiation fallout apparently, and each unit that isn't within your opponent's deployment zone has to roll a dice. On a 3+, they suffer a mortal wound. From how it's handed out, it sounds like units that are partially in their deployment zone would still be affected by this. It just says within, not wholly within. And again, it's going to cause some decent chip damage over the course of the game, I think. Backfield objective squads and certainly elite units are really not going to like this. It's not often that a faction special rule potentially is just going to wind up in some direct dead enemy models, just handed out a bit randomly. I feel like between this and that Conqueror Imperative, it sounds like enemy units are really going to be incentivized to move up, push into the midfield, and try and escape from the radiation, which is an interesting sort of dynamic for the army. Overall, I think it's certainly good fun, if a bit weird. Seems like it could be a lot stronger on certain armies than others maybe, particularly for gunline armies that don't really want to be moving up and playing too aggressively. Though I guess it would be a bit worse against armies like World Eaters, who might just be charging their way straight out of their deployment zone as fast as they can. I feel like the full text for the Battleshock rules could be kind of interesting to see for this as well. I still don't think that Games Workshop has officially confirmed anywhere whether or not units that have taken Battleshock need to test to regroup the next turn. If they do regroup just absolutely automatically, then this might have a little bit less impact. If Battleshocked units do need to pass a test to go back to normal again, then this could be really quite big. Let me know your thoughts though, and how bad would the big Admech radiation bombardment be for your army? Next up, we've got a few more quickfire rules. The Ruststalkers have their optimised gate with some bonuses to their movement as before. Now it just seems to be that they have +1 to their advance and charges innately. +1 to charge is rather nice, and what's kind of interesting about this rule is that now they have a bit of synergy with nearby battle line units, so if you're next to some Skitarii Rangers or Vanguard or something, then suddenly the rule becomes a +2 to their advance and charge. In particular, the +2 inches to their charges is kind of rare in 40k, and that seems pretty excellent to me. Maybe it could be kind of interesting with Strategic Reserve and coming in from the edge of the board. If they could do that next to a Ranger or Vanguard unit, they could potentially get a 7-inch charge on the enemy without them having much chance to react. We don't know the current movement characteristic for these guys as well. If it still remains kind of high, this could be a massive charge threat range as well. And particularly so with one of their previewed stratagems that we'll get onto in a second, as there is an option for advance and charge in the codex. In theory, if these guys retain an 8-inch movement, then that'll be an average charge distance of about 22.5 when using that stratagem. That's still an enormous threat range for a scary melee unit. Obviously, we need to see the rest of the datasheet to see how they're really doing, but I feel like this is fairly good news for Ruststalkers remaining fairly relevant in the new codex. Next up, we've got the Eradication Beamer for the Onager Dunecrawler. This gun was fairly underpowered in 8th and 9th edition in my opinion, not really taken very much over the neutron lasers or the Icarus array in the past. It does seem that even the Admech vehicles will be dropping down to a ballistic skill 4+, though I suppose with the Onager Dunecrawlers they might have a better chance of just remaining stationary, being big vehicles that might have okay lines of sight. Maybe the Eradication Beamer might not be the optimal weapon for that though, as it has its best attack mode when it gets close. As before, I feel like this gun is trying to be the main anti-elite infantry option for the Onager Dunecrawler. Both profiles get d6 shots with the blast keyword, and that will be kind of relevant in 10th with targeting 5-man infantry units now. The basic profile's got a big 36-inch range, strength 9, AP -2 and damage 2. I'd say okay but not standout. Really you want the focus range if possible with the strength 9, AP -3 and damage 3. That's going to be pretty effective against more elite infantry like Terminators, and a lot more threatening to light and medium vehicles. It's still not going to be much of an anti-tank weapon really, I suspect that you'd need the neutron laser for that. Against heavy tanks this will be wounding on 5s now. Overall feels like it's kept most of the same character as it had before. Ballistic skill 4+ won't be great against modifiers and things. It has picked up the sustained hits D3 rule though, so if you hit on a 6 then that's an extra D3 hits. Means that one of these guns will normally average 2.9 hits on the enemy or thereabout, even if it doesn't have any buffs from Protector Doctrina. Doesn't look awful. I feel like I'd really like to see the Icarus arrays and neutron lasers though. I feel like there's a decent chance they'll be better. Next up, it seems that the other two Doctrina Imperatives have been reinterpreted as stratagems for this formation, and we've got an Aggressor and a Bulwark stratagem that are locked to one of the Doctrinas. Unlike the Doctrina rules, these ones are locked to Skitarii units. I'd guess that will be the same ones that have the keyword now. Things like most of the augmented infantry, but not things like Tech Priests or the Cataphron Servitors. These stratagems are also locked to one of the Doctrinas as well, so they could be relevant in which one you're picking, I suppose. This Aggressor one looks absolutely excellent though. Basically it's just advance and charge for one of your Skitarii units, provided you're in the Conqueror Doctrina Imperative. As mentioned with the Ruststalkers, this is a great stratagem to have access to. Potentially it's an extra 6 inches to your charge threat range and an average of 3 or 4. Looks absolutely spectacular with those Ruststalkers who get the bonus to their advance as well as charge. They're going to be going fast. And it's also got great synergy with the standard Doctrina rule as well, as you get to advanced shoot and charge with this. Overall looks like a really good stratagem. The other one is the new rule for Bulwark Doctrina. This one feels like the counterpart to the above, as basically you can only use this one in Protector Imperative, and again it's only Skitarii units. This one is basically like Rotate Ion Shields for the Imperial Knights, but it's for Admech and any of the Skitarii. Basically when your opponent selects the units to be a target of their shooting attacks, you get to use this stratagem for 1 CP, and it gives them a great big 4+ invul save until the end of the turn. Weirdly enough, by the exact wording of the stratagem, it doesn't look like the invul save only applies to shooting attacks, even though it looks like it's triggered in the shooting phase, so presumably that would mean that you'd get this in combat as well, so it would be very nice for a frontline unit that you think is going to get both shot and then charged. As we'll see in just a second, it seems really big for Skitarii now. Looks like Rangers and Vanguard have got a 5+ armor save at base and only 6+ bionics, so this would be an enormous durability boost for them and make the blocks really hard to remove from the table. If the vehicles retain the Skitarii keyword though, this is also amazing for them. Things like the Iron Striders and Dragoons and maybe the Scorpius tanks will be great with this too. They tend to get focused by high AP shots with anti-tank weapons, so a 4+ invul is absolute gold for them as well. Overall, this does look really nice. I suppose you're not going to have access to it all the time, as I feel like a lot of the game you might want Conqueror, but for the turns when you do have Protector on the go, I feel like this one is going to be lovely. Finally, we've got a couple of datasheets, and first up we have the Vanguard. As mentioned a few times already, this datasheet does seem to give us a few more hints as to the way that the faction's going on base stats and things. Looks like their leadership is 7+, fairly common to most of the factions that aren't Space Marines that we've seen so far, and the defense of the base models has got a fair bit worse. They're only saved 5+ now, and their invul save has gone down to 6+ again. It briefly went up to a 5+ as part of one of the last balanced data slates. As mentioned before as well, it looks like they're only hitting on 4s, not 3s. Previously they'd hit at 4s in combats, but at 3s at range. Perhaps one of the most interesting changes to the datasheet is their alteration to Rad saturation. It still looks kind of powerful and certainly useful for units of these trying to take objectives, but I feel like the -1 to strength and toughness will be missed. That rule just made them really quite surprisingly tough and strong against incidental melees against similar sort of class units, so it did make them quite a nice unit to have on the front line. Now though, the thing that it debuffs is the objective control stat of units within 3 inches. It doesn't affect vehicle units, but basically gets to -1 from the objective control of models in that unit. It doesn't appear that this caps at 1 or anything like that. Looks like you can actually flat out reduce objective control to 0 for units that only had 1, and when that's combined with the battle line objective control that these guys have of 2 per model, it looks like while the Vanguard are alive, objectives are going to be really hard to take from them. Kind of sad that it doesn't really do much in terms of damage and defense now, but I still feel that this probably keeps the feel of these guys of being pretty excellent on objectives on the front line. Seems like they'd be solid for a unit or two moving up towards the midfield points. Otherwise, we get to see the profiles of a fair few Admech weapons and upgrades. Perhaps the most interesting thing for these guys is the Radium Carbine as their signature weapon. This has seen a little bit of a shift around and looks rather excellent against their optimal targets, still being 3 shots hitting on a 4+, but gets the crazy boost of anti-infantry 4+ when they're targeting enemy foot soldiers. I guess it means against vehicles and monsters you're not auto-wounding on a 6+ anymore, but against enemy troops and infantry this is utterly brutal. They still spam out a pretty crazy amount of shots, 30 shots for a unit of 10 of them for example, as basically every hit that they land will auto-wound the enemy. That means that you'd be putting out a pretty reliable 15 wounds on any enemy infantry target full stop, and that's going to be solid damage output against just about everything in my opinion. It's really going to cut through things with low saves, but even against things like Space Marines you're potentially failing 5 saves on a tactical marine unit or something. That just seems surprisingly massive damage output. From the previews that we've seen as well, I suspect that Swarm and Beast units will actually also have the infantry keyword in 10th, means that this could be a little bit more wide-reaching, but I guess when you're firing against units like cavalry or mounted units, that will be a bit worse. The weapons have lost the assault keyword at base, but they can combine it with Conqueror Doctrina to get it back. Looks like there'll be a unit that works quite well with that Doctrina as opposed to Protector. Overall, the Rad weapons of Vanguard still look crazily scary, if maybe a little bit more focused on anti-infantry. Otherwise, we do see a few other things. The Omnispec still gives ignores cover. Data tethers are the same for many radios, with a chance to refund stratagems on a 5+, kind of random but useful when it goes off I guess. And for some of the special weapons in the units, it looks like the arc rifle is now up to strength 8 and gains anti-vehicle 4+ with devastating wounds, rather nice. And the transuranic arquebus gets the heavy keyword even if you're not in Protector, and that has the precision shots rule, so it looks like that's still going to be a go-to choice for sniping enemy characters out of units. Overall, really interesting changes for the Vanguard. They do look like they're a bit easier to kill between the changes to the Rad and their saves, but their anti-infantry guns look thoroughly brutal to fight, to be honest. If your opponent does happen to be bringing a fair amount of infantry, these squads look like they're going to be absolutely key for raw damage dealing. Finally, last but by no means least, we have the big guy Cawl himself. He was kind of disappointingly weak for his points for 9th edition, so hopefully in 10th he'll be a bit more usable. Statline wise, he's gained a couple of wounds and he still keeps his 2+, 4+ invul and his auto repair, still going to be fairly hard to shift. And it looks like for some reason, rather than being a leader choice, he's going to have the lone operative keyword, and he gains that provided he's within 3 inches of any Admech unit, vehicle or infantry. I guess that's maybe with the theme of tech priests and things. Doesn't look like he's got any Mars keyword locking him to that Forge world, not that it necessarily matters given that Admech only have the one epic hero character. And on this datasheet at least, it doesn't look like there's any options for him repairing vehicles now. Not sure whether that could be a base Admech rule that we haven't seen yet, or could be on the vehicle datasheets. I think it would be a bit sad if the mechanics of the Imperium couldn't heal their vehicles anymore. It looks like from his base stats, his melee has got significantly better. The Solar Atomizer still packs a small punch at range, fairly similar stats to how it was before, but it's got a small range boost to 18 inches now, so I guess that'll be a bit more meaningful. I'd say the major boost though is to his melee power, where previously he'd just have the 4 attacks and he'd have to choose which one. Now it looks like he's getting a significant amount of extra attacks, as it looks like he gets to strike with the Omnissiah Axe, and then also the Arc Scourge, and also the Mechadendrite Hive all at the same time. Previously he'd have to choose between the Omnissiah Axe and the Arc Scourge, so he does get quite a lot more hits in melee, even if for the most part they're kind of low strength and only damage 1. He is going to be a model that's fairly threatening against light infantry, but struggle to take out things that are bigger or tougher. He's not really famed for being a combat character though, and the biggest thing I think is his Canticles choice. It looks like this is the new version of that rule, and the whole army rule is just the Doctrinas now, not Canticles, and basically Cawl gets to pick himself between 3 different auras. Reroll hits of 1 like old Space Marine captains, though not restricted to core or anything like that, so it looks like it would both affect his own attacks and vehicles and stuff. A fairly standard aura that we're seeing currently to reroll leadership and battle shock if that's the most important thing. Maybe that seems usable enough if you just desperately need to hold an objective and it's going to be game changing. And then what looks like possibly the most valuable out of any of them, I'd say, is the stealth aura he gets. This means that friendly Admech units within 6 inches get the stealth ability. Not officially previewed yet, but thought to be a -1 to hit against ranged attacks. If so, then that's probably going to be the biggest deal in my opinion. Really quite a big boost against enemy gun lines, particularly ones that hit on force, though it's nice that you can switch him into aggression mode and get the rerolls if you just need raw damage. Overall looks usable, if not enormously massively standout buffs. He doesn't get to target 1 unit for big 4 rerolls anymore. Hopefully his points cost will justify his abilities. Overall though, some pretty fun rules for the Admech. I really like the Doctrina Imperatives. The Rad bombardment is kind of weird, but really quite evocative of the enemy army being under radiation bombardment from the Admech. Certainly a rule that they'll feel. The 2 stratagems that are linked to the Doctrinas look great, I think, and I feel like Vanguard are going to be a pretty exciting units to use. Maybe not one to go mad on, just in case that the enemy doesn't have that much infantry, but if they do get in range of their optimal targets, they're going to be kind of devastating. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep up with Games Workshop's news and previews for their 40k factions. Finally, if you've enjoyed all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you're interested in helping support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.